going live. There we go. And Jai, there you are. Purnaprjna Prabhu. Obeisances, Jai Srila Prabhupada. Wow. Krishna Chandra Prabhu, we have the actual author here with us. Isn't that amazing?
That is fantastic. Good fortune for us.
Going live. There we go. And Jai, there you. Okay, I'll shut that off. And I will put this on. Where are you in Alachua, Purnaprjna Prabhu?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So I thought what would be appropriate before starting part 2 of your book. I think you may agree with me. This song by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Vidyara Vilase, from Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sharanagati, could apply it to today's scientists. I'll just read the translation and we can start reading your book. All right, here we are. With great enthusiasm, I spent my time in the pleasures of mundane learning and never worshipped your lotus feet, O Lord. Now you are my only shelter. Reading on and on, my hopes grew and grew, for I considered the acquisition of material knowledge to be life's true goal. How fruitless those hopes turned out to be, for all my knowledge proved feeble. Now I know that all such erudition is actually pure ignorance. All the so-called knowledge of this world is born of the flickering potency of your illusory energy, Maya. It is an impediment to the execution of devotional service to you. Indulgence in mundane knowledge verily makes an ass of the eternal soul by encouraging his infatuation with his temporary world. Here is one person who has been turned into such an ass, who for so long has carried on his back the useless burden of material existence. Now in my old age, for want of the power to enjoy, I find that nothing at all pleases me. Life has now become agony, for my so-called erudite knowledge has proven itself to be worthless ignorance. Material knowledge has now become a pointed shaft and has pierced my heart with the intolerable burning pain of ignorance. O Lord, there is no treasure worth seeking in this world other than your lotus feet. Bhaktivinoda abandons all his mundane knowledge and makes your lotus feet the sum and substance of his life. So, Purnaprjna Prabhu, could you, before we commence the reading, could you please say few words on how you think that this song by Bhaktivinoda Thakur relates to your book?
Yes. What came to my mind is that when you think of the previous acharyas, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he especially was around Christians, so he wrote much try and convince Christians of the truths of Krishna consciousness.
Yes.
Bhakti Siddhanta, he had to fight with the impersonalists and the caste Brahmins, especially the caste Brahmins. They were very angry that he was converting low-class people to become Brahmins. Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, on the other hand, we chant Nirvishesha Shunyavadi. Especially Shunyavadis are these mundane scientists, think that everything has come from nothing. So, Srila Prabhupada also explained that it is only Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati who really utilized the principle of Yukta Vairagya that enabled the whole Krishna consciousness movement to flourish. It's really based on Yukta Vairagya, that anything can be dovetailed in the service of Krishna. Not that you have to go away to a secluded place and sit silently or whatever, but everything can be used. So Prabhupada used all kinds of low-class people and engaged them in Krishna's service, and he utilized all of the modern technological conveniences also. And he was especially made at how in the West, it is a very Western thing, Darwinian idea that life evolved from chemicals. So he was very unhappy that this theory was predominant. And in fact, in the May 3rd Bhagavatam class in Los Angeles, she said, "This is my greatest grief, that human society is being misled by this rascal Darwin's theory."
Mm-hmm.
So he spent a lot of time encouraging Swarup Damodar Das at that time. And he wanted Swarup Damodar to utilize the mundane. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is rejecting the mundane education, but Srila Prabhupada told Bhaktisiddhanta to prove that Darwin's theory is false by logic and by science. He wanted to use the scientific understanding against atheism. And actually, that's quite a prominent theme amongst many today, is that empiric evidence, which is provided by science, actually points to the existence of God and not away from God. So that's my thought after hearing this song.
Thank you very much for your commentary. I'd like to introduce you to our god sister, Nanda Patni Devi Dasi, all the way in Santa Cruz. She's come to read your book and to hear your comments. We have Nahush Prabhu, who I believe is in the Detroit area. Ananda Dev, I have no idea where he's coming from, but he's attended many of our broadcasts in the past. So I thank everyone for coming to read with Purnaprjna Prabhu his new book, Life Beyond Darwin. When was it actually released? Jai, thank you for holding it up. A critique of abiogenesis. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, abiogenesis means chemical evolution before biology. According to Darwin's theory, there had to be an evolution before biology, and the chemicals somehow magically arrange themselves to become the first simple life.
Yes, that is quite amazing. Prabhupada said in one place, there's no such thing as a miracle. He said a miracle is when Krishna is working, when God is arranging, but people don't understand that he's doing that. That's what he said.
So before we begin, I would just like to recommend that May 3rd, 1973 morning walk of Srila Prabhupada with Swarup Damodar and others. I consider that the absolute, I don't know what to say, strongest and concise and clearest vision of what Prabhupada wanted the Bhaktivedanta Institute to do.
And what is the essence of that?
The essence of that is that this Darwin's theory is misleading the whole human society. So you must challenge it and defeat it. It must be challenged and defeated. And what I have found after years of research so I could write this book and studying Prabhupada's conversations repeatedly with Swarup Damodar is I don't think it's difficult. It's actually very easy to defeat. Of course, stubborn people will never admit defeat. Like the story of the scissors and the
and the
knife.
Sorry about that. Yes, they were arguing how the paper was cut, and finally the man said it was cut by the knife, picked up the man who was insisting the paper was cut with the scissors, and he threw him in the lake or in the ocean,
Yeah, or river.
in the
And
river.
the man, scissors man, while he's drowning, he still would not admit his fault, so he just insisted, scissors, scissors.
As he
So
was
the
going.
evolutionary atheists are like that. No matter what is presented to them, they stick, because for them, atheism is the axiom of life. They begin with, there's no God, there's nothing beyond what we can observe.
I was very impressed when I read a quote from Srila Prabhupada that his purpose in creating the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, which has cost over 85 million now to produce, to build, was to destroy atheism in the form of mechanistic science, atheistic science, and communism. Wow.
Yeah.
So how important this book is that you've produced?
Well, I can say in a very concise way what I feel the contribution of the book is. Because in Prabhupada's time, he asked Swarup Damodar, is no one objecting to this Darwin's theory? And Swarup Damodar said practically no one, very difficult to find. But now, actually, there's strong opposition to Darwin's theory. There are many, 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 many. And but what they are basically arguing over is the body, or in the simplest way, the living cell, and then from that, the different bodies up to the human body. Did it come together randomly, or was it designed and purposefully arranged? That is the debate. The Darwinists, they say it was all random, just this way, whatever. Of course, they cannot demonstrate it in any way, but they say random. And then others, there's an intelligent design movement, and they point out, no, there's so much evidence, there's an intelligent designer. So what my book in the third chapter, it shows that, well, in the first chapter, and especially the second chapter, the body is actually a machine. And even the materialists, they always talk about it as a machine. The human body is the most complicated machine. And even in the cell, there's so many machines working. But of course, everyone knows you're not a machine, you're a person. So the third chapter is to show that we are not the machine, we are not the body. So they're arguing back and forth, thinking they're talking about the origin of life, but actually it's not the origin of life, it's the origin of the machines. And that's very difficult for them to understand also, but that's my attempt.
Thank you very much. It's a valuable tool in our arsenal to defeat atheism.
Can I ask a question around that?
Yes, please.
Yes.
So, Prabhu, how does that interface with the strength of all these people that are so interested in transhumanism and artificial intelligence, which is really creating quite a big influence where I live in California?
Yeah, I haven't studied, transhumanism or artificial intelligence, but of course they can manipulate the machine. To live in this world, we need this body, which is controlled by the brain. And that can be there's one place where in a Prabhupada conversation that it was maybe Shyam Sundar, or I forget who, but somebody remarked how that the scientists there working genetically, trying to make genetic engineering, and then he gave the example, it was recent then, of thalidomide. They had some kind of drug which they gave to pregnant women to help them in some way, but it was just producing deformed babies. So whoever it was saying, you know, they're able to manipulate the chromosomes or this or that. And Prabhupada just said, all they can do is make it worse.
I mean, this
and in my book also, there's a scientist, because there's someone who claimed that he created a new life form, but actually just took a cell already alive and he just fiddled around with the genome, and then he made it a little different, and then he claimed that I made a new life form. But this scientist, Dr. Tour, who's a very high nanotechnology guy, he just said, you just made it worse, that's all.
Yeah,
so they can fiddle around with this, but they'll just make things worse.
Yeah, indeed, this is the big controversy over the CRISPR technology, where they can split all the genes and, yeah, claim that they're creating new select humans and all the rest of it. So speaking to your idea of making it worse.
Making it worse in what way? Because it became deformed, or?
Well, in the thalidomide case, yes, but in the CRISPR, it's an ethical issue that they feel that people will want to be creating designer humans, you know, choosing the genes they want and the genes they don't want.
Custom-made babies.
Yeah.
Were we going to say Purnaprjna, Prabhu?
Well, these scientists who talked about the person who said he made a new life form, a new living cell, he just reduced the number of the complexity of the cell and made it worse, actually. You know, it's a technical thing.
Where does the expression ghost in the machine come from? You were mentioning earlier, the body's a machine. There's that expression, I heard Saraswati quoted it, I think, the ghost in the machine.
Yeah, Rupanuga asked me that question some time ago, and I researched it, but I forget. It was some British man not so long ago, and I don't really know what to say.
Okay, some scientist or professor or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, do you mind, would you rather go right back to the very beginning of the book, or do you want to continue from where we left off last time, page 12?
I'll continue.
Okay, very good. So we'll have you read the first page, please, Prabhu, and then we will, let me see if I can locate it here. Where is it? Sorry, I had it ready, and it's disappeared for right now. Just in the meantime, could you just say some? Okay, here it is. Great. Now, could you just say something briefly before we begin reading? Where did you first meet the devotees, and where did you first see Srila Prabhupada?
Well, I was in Boston, 1970. I got a first pamphlet of essays, Reservoir of Pleasure, from Jadharani. And then
Nice.
Went to the temple and joined in September of 1970. Mostly Hridayananda was preaching to me. There were a lot of elder devotees there.
First, you got something in Boston, because Sri Dayananda Maharaj was on the West Coast, right?
No, but then he was in Boston.
Oh, okay.
1970.
That was the
The
beginning.
press was there.
Sorry.
The press was there. Satsrupa was president. Gyrase was there. Jayadwaita was there. The art department was there. Purnaprjna was there.
Wonderful. And you're quite prolific. You've produced, how many books have you produced now?
Oh, I don't know, many.
They're wonderful, Prabhu. I just finished a book you edited with Kushakrat. Vilap Kusmanjali. It's a short book, but it's wonderful.
And you've done summaries of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Bhagavat, Mahabharat.
Yes.
And what have been some of the others you've worked on?
Bhagavatam and Ramayana. Those were my first 4 books, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and story form of the Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. I recently had a book published here of Prabhupada's, a garland of Prabhupada's preaching verses from Srimad Bhagavatam, how he preached from, how he emphasized certain verses in the Bhagavatam and how he preached from them in different ways again and again. That's published by the same publisher as this book.
What is that called? Who is the publisher?
The publisher is Micro-Organisms Long, and her company is bookrightspress.com.
Right, in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so without further ado, yes, Daneshwar Prabhu, Robert Carroll is, he's asking a question. He is Purnaprjna Prabhu. Robert Carroll is Purnaprjna Prabhu. Our guy.
So happy to meet you. See you. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Thank you
Krishna.
for your service.
Jai.
I was recommended to use my birth name for this book because it's, and Rupanuga wanted me to emphasize to you today, this book is not really for devotees primarily, but for the general masses of people.
Okay. Mass distribution book.
Yeah.
Hey, Hare Krishna, this is Rasangi out in California, but I want to say, Prabhu, I'm enjoying it so much. I'm getting so much out of it because we were raised on this stuff and it's hard to let it go. And
Yes.
Your book is helping to put it in a right perspective. And I feel like I'm more able to speak about it with others. It's helping debunk a lot of these things that we were spoon-fed in school as fact. So thank you very much.
Jai.
Thank you for your appreciation.
Sorry.
Prabhupada, in one conversation rather late, Prabhupada emphasized that they claim life evolved from chemicals, but that they've not been able to make one blade of grass. So he says just this one argument alone kills them. Okay, you claim that life came from chemicals. You've been working in your laboratories, but you haven't made an ant, a blade of grass, or nothing, or a single cell.
If Prabhupada gave the example that you claim to be a millionaire, well, show me $100. Like
They don't give a post-dated check because they always say, oh, we're just on the verge of it. We're working on it. We're just almost there, you know. They've been almost there for 100 years.
Right.
It was very nice to hear that Darwin, it was always known as a theory. It was never considered to be the fact. He didn't consider it to be the fact. It was simply a postulation, huh?
Yes.
Yikes! But we were told it was fact, and this is the way it is. So I'm glad you're here. I hope you can explain things. We had lots of questions. I did anyway. When we read the first 12 pages, maybe you can help answer some of those as we go along.
Yes.
Thank you very
You
much.
see, there's a lot of propaganda even in this science. You know, by propaganda, you can make any kind of claim and drive it home again and again, and people accept it. So it's not a fact, it's just propaganda.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you very much.
Did not Darwin himself say in his Origin of the Species that his theory was actually just a theory?
Yeah, of course, I didn't read the whole book, but I've read different quotes, which I didn't even put in this book, where he admitted, you know, doubts and things that were impossible to explain. You
There's
know,
one
Darwin is
very,
it's just a
I'm sorry.
rebellion against the Catholic Church, that's all,
Mm-hmm.
against organized religion.
Wow. You know
I
what
don't know
else?
He lost his faith, and
Oh,
so he was hoping anyhow to prove that they're wrong.
Daneshwar Prabhu has his hand up next. Yes, Daneshwar Prabhu.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read them, but there's one fairly honest scientist, Robert Lewontin. He wrote a book called Biology as Ideology. And since you're writing on that subject, you might want to check that out. But he's very honest enough to say that science is not necessarily true, but science is what scientists say it is. And he said, we can make any claim we want, but because we have position, people will accept it. And he gives it an example of such bogus science as the idea that homosexuality is because of it's in somebody's genes. He said that was, promoted over and over again by various scientists to the point where people accept it as true, but it's not true. Anyway, you might want to check that out because he's a rare, honest scientist who's speaking like that to the public.
His name is Robert what?
Lewontin, Lewontin.
L-E-W.
Book.
Oh, I've heard of him.
It's a very small book and a quick read. Yeah, he's a famous what do they call it? Not microbiologist.
Microbiologist,
Anyway,
yeah.
somebody that deals in all that micro stuff.
Cool. Let's get started on the book.
Hey, where do I start? Because what you have on the Word file.
The fundamental question, starting page 12.
Okay, but in the book, it's not page 12. Just a minute. I can find it in 1 minute.
Right now, the reading order I have is Daneshwar, myself, yourself. Do you want us to follow that order, or would you like to be the first to read?
Anything, whatever you like.
Okay, would you like to start?
Let others read.
Okay. Daneshwar?
Oh, okay. Where do we start? From the fundamental question?
Top of page 12.
Okay. The fundamental question facing those who research life is, where did the information in the DNA come from? This problem has never been solved. Those who adhere to a naturalistic view of reality stick to their belief that the information within the DNA must have randomly formed. They call it self-assembled these days. On the other hand, there are others who reason that the coded information in DNA must have been consciously arranged by a higher intelligence, because it is everyone's experience that all other examples of specified information are intelligently produced, just like Saraswati's book, Information, Demonstration by Information Theory that Life Cannot Arise from Matter. Wonderful book. The website, leavingbio.net, describes why there was a dramatic increase in our understanding of the cell's complexity after the Miller experiment. With the invention of the electron microscope, A whole new world was opened up to scientists. Most light microscopes will enlarge a specimen up to 1,000 times, but the electron microscope enlarges the specimen 250,000 times and higher. Before these microscopes, scientists were able to discover parts of this, using these microscopes, scientists were able to discover parts of the cell never seen or known of before. What are we reading, please? I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm late.
This is Purnaprjna Prabhu's book, Life Beyond Darwin.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Oh, good. I love this. This is very good. I just want to interject one short thing that Prabhupada didn't. I wrote to Prabhupada about this question. I became a devotee just after receiving my master's degree in engineering, Master of Science, and I wrote to Prabhupada. This is in '73. Before there was Bhaktivedanta Institute. And I wrote to Prabhupada asking how I could use my scientific credentials in Krishna service. And he wrote back that our main aim is not to, I suggested in my letter to him that we do an experiment to prove that the moonshine provides the succulence and juicy taste to fruits, and as Prabhupada stated in the Bhagavad Gita. And that by that we could convince the scientists of the validity of Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada replied in a letter to Bhaktivedanta, December 1, 1973, our main aim is not to convince the rascal scientists, because after all, they have free will. And if they're determined to remain atheistic, what can we do? He said, our main aim is to convince the innocent public that life comes from life and not from matter. So Prabhupada was very much, he wanted this type of preaching directed toward the public, not to convince the scientists.
Are you able to come on camera, Dineshwar, or do you have to remain as a black?
Well, it said my bandwidth is low.
I see. Okay. Okay.
If my voice breaks up, I don't know. It
So
does sometimes, she told me.
okay, I understand why you're doing that. Okay, did you want to continue reading?
Yeah.
Okay.
You tell me when to stop.
The incredible complexity of the cell.
The incredible complexity of the cell. Cytologists, those who study cells, now realize that a living cell contains hundreds of thousands of complex parts comprising tens of thousands of micro-machines. Ken Dill, a member of the National Academy of Sciences, who has studied the folding mechanisms of proteins, assures us that this is not a metaphor. These are actual machines, although incredibly small. I want to buy this book. This is really good.
Right.
The technology of the 21st century has delved into the tiniest particles and has revealed that the cell is the most complex system mankind has ever confronted. Joseph Sackbach, who received his PhD in biology from the University of Chicago, has written, "Today we know that the cell contains power stations producing energy to be used by the cell, factories manufacturing the enzymes and hormones essential for life, a data bank where all necessary information about all products to be produced are recorded, complex transportation systems and pipelines for carrying raw materials and products from one place to another, advanced laboratories and refineries for breaking down external raw materials into their usable parts, and specialized cell membrane proteins to control the incoming and outgoing materials. And these constitute only a part of this incredibly complex system." This is wonderful. This is great. I got to get this book. Thank you.
Can get it.
Would you like to? Yes. Amazon.com.
Okay. I've read enough, yeah?
No, well, I'm suggesting reading a page each, but if you've read enough, then I can
Well,
take over.
okay, I didn't know. I thought we were just doing the 2-paragraph thing. Okay. The action of the enzyme DNA gyrase, which is a molecular machine involved with cellular reproduction, graphically illustrates the complex behavior in cells. In the bacterium, such as E. coli, the DNA molecule is a loop-shaped intertwined double helix which separates into 2 helixes during cellular reproduction. As the upper portion of the helix uncoils, it naturally causes a lower portion to wind on itself or supercoil. Since the DNA is already folded hundreds of times to fit into the cell, supercoiling invariably causes the strands to tangle. This tangling would prohibit reproduction so the cell activates an enzyme, DNA gyrase, that unravels the knots in the DNA strands. The gyrase rearranges the DNA strands by first cutting one of the overlapping strands, then pulling the other strand through the opening, and finally joining the ends of the cut strand back together. By means of this highly sophisticated operation, the DNA gyrase sorts out the tangle of chromosomes. Simply amazing. Another example of the cell's internal complexity is its formation of fatty acid, palmitic acid, and 14 molecular subunits. Fatty acids are the chief molecules for energy storage in cells. To manufacture palmitic acid, the cell creates an elaborate circular molecular machine from protein molecules. At the machine's center is an arm that swings through 6 workstations. Each time the arm rotates, 2 molecular subunits of the fatty acid are added by the action of enzymes at the workstations. Enzymes are highly complex protein molecules that aid chemical reactions within the cell. After 17 rotations, the required 14 units are present and the fatty acid is released.
Does anyone have any comments or question on this first page? A lot of it's going over my head. I'm hearing it, but I'm not. Yes?
Is this
Yes,
the book that he just showed us?
Yes.
Life After Death?
No, Life Beyond Darwin.
Life what?
Beyond Darwin.
Oh, okay. I didn't see the title. I thought it said Life Beyond Death. Okay, Life Beyond Darwin. Okay.
And we have the author here. The author is here.
Yeah. Wonderful.
So this is so confusing. Is there any way you can simplify
Can
or
you
take out?
put that in English for us, Purnaprjna, Prabhu?
Yeah, tell us what's important about that. Tell us what's
Well,
important about that.
It's impossible to simplify an understanding of the complexity because nobody can understand the complexity really. But the main purpose, when I was reading or listening to so many people explain all these things, I could not really understand much about it, but it just gave me a sense of appreciation, one, how complex the cell is, and also how it is working methodically as if someone is there manipulating everything. Paramatma is in every atom and is everywhere. It's just working. The idea of it being random is absurd. And that's the main thing. You can see it's so complex, it's working so purposefully. The idea of everything being randomly formed is just totally absurd.
Yeah. Joseph Crick, one of the co-founders of DNA, by understanding the complexity of the cell, came to the conclusion that life did not arise from evolution, that life came from somewhere else.
It's called Panspermia.
Panspermia, right.
I also put that in my book later on.
Good.
Okay.
And may I say
But it's
something?
Yes.
At the beginning, we read about the development of the cell, Prabhu. I'm going to have to go over that, but it was so beautiful and complex And then eventually comes the covering of the cell. You gave such a beautiful development of the cell's creation and complexity, which was very awe-inspiring. And it shows you how complex and how ridiculous that it came from random, and it came out of randomness. It's ridiculous. And the other thing was the maggots on the meat. The maggots on the meat spoke out in the beginning of the book. Yeah, it's just common sense, but we're told this is science and you have to believe it, but it doesn't make sense. Thank you.
Prabhupada, a number of times he said these are not even common sense men. They may be professors, PhD, 100 times, but they're not common sense men.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, my turn.
Fascinating. Thank you for being here and helping us to take out so we can use it in our teaching and preaching.
For this rotary assembly machine to work, all 6 different enzymes must be present in the right order, and the molecular arm must be properly arranged. To construct its protective wall, a cell initially forms molecular building blocks from simpler compounds by processes involving many sophisticated operations. Once these blocks are assembled, the cell arranges them into a precise weave of horizontal and vertical rows comprising the cell wall. This manufacturing process resembles a complex factory assembly operation, wherein specifically designed machines first build component parts from raw materials and then assemble those components into a functioning finished product. Every year, our understanding of the cell's complexity pushes further away the target of what needs to be synthesized to provide proof that life could have randomly evolved from chemicals. That is to say, the goal which must be achieved, the synthesis of a single living cell, which appeared to be not a complex problem in Darwin's time, is a goal that has become so far away that today it is admittedly impossible to attain. Those who champion the theory of abiogenesis, or the idea that life evolved from chemicals by an unguided process, need to prove their theory by demonstrating it in the laboratory. No one expects them to produce a chicken, mosquito, or human being, but at least they must produce a living cell from scratch if they want their theory to be accepted. Evolutionary scientists cannot synthesize a single cell, nor can they hope to do so in the foreseeable future. Why then is the theory that the first cell was randomly formed presented in textbooks and the media as if it were a fact? The answer is that the worldview of mainstream evolutionary science, which is materialism or reductionism, only allows for this theory and not any other, no matter where the evidence leads. As Dr. James Tour remarked, quote, "It is the only ball game in town," unquote. Curiously, nature is producing countless living cells while the most intelligent molecular biologists are not able to synthesize one. This is just an hour and a half from me, University of Waterloo. In a talk given in 2016 at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada, entitled "The Origin of Life, an Inside Story," Dr. James Tour said, "Let's assume that all the building blocks of life, not just their precursors, could be made in high degrees of purity. All the carbohydrates, all the amino acids, all the nucleic acids, and all the lipids. And let us further assume that they are comfortably stored in cool caves, away from sunlight and oxygen, so as to be stable against environmental degradation. And let us further assume that they are all together in the same cave, so that they can conveniently mix together as needed. Now, how would they assemble? The mechanism does not exist for their assembly. There is no synthetic chemist that would claim differently. Did you send him a book yet, Purnaprjna Prabhu, Dr. James Stewart?
Oh, actually, when I was researching the book, there were some things I couldn't understand. I sent him emails and he explained it to me.
Oh, nice.
So we established some kind of little contact. And then what happened was that I listened to or watched a more recent lecture, or no, it was an interview, and he said, let's do a thought experiment. Suppose there's a cell that's working perfectly with all its parts, it's living, and then after just 1 nanosecond, because he's a nanotechnology guy, he only thinks in terms of nano this, nano that. So he says, suppose after 1 nanosecond, it dies, and it's just everything stops. What happened? So when I heard that, I thought, he's a Christian. I thought he's come close to the idea that the life is different than the mechanism of the cell or the body. That the life is the part. So I wrote him an email and I said, I heard you say this. I have the answer for you. So he gave me his personal number.
Nice.
And I talked to him, but then I started to explain how you're not the body, and maybe Bhagavad Gita explains it's the beginning of spiritual knowledge is body's always, and then he just became rude and ended the conversation.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Strange.
He's very good. I use him more than anyone in this book, but in a more recent thing that I listened to, which is, I think, not in the book, he was explaining to his audience, mostly college students and teachers, I think, how the body, because it was a lecture actually on, what is that called? When Jesus Christ.
Resurrection?
Resurrection, yeah. So it was a talk on resurrection. So he was trying to explain how we are also resurrected, that God is all powerful and he can rearrange our molecules no matter where they have gone, or something like that. But anyways, explaining that truthfully, how the body is changing at every second. He's saying your body, you don't have the same body when you walked in, when you walked into this lecture. But he said, you are not the same person that walked into this lecture.
I see.
So the thing is, he's so stuck on the body being the self and that the body is resurrected, the body is life, that he could not understand the simple truth that you're not the body. Life is different from the body. But it just shows us total madness. You're not the person who walked in the door. Of course, you're the same person that walked in the door. Someone should have shouted to him, and you're not the same scientist who got the job. You're an imposter.
Good one. Just using his logic, yes.
Yeah.
I'll continue reading then. It'll be your turn, Purnaprjna, and then Nandapatni after me. Did anyone want to comment on what was just said before we move on? Dineshwar, did you have something to say? No?
No.
I had a quick comment, a little tangential.
Okay, what is go ahead, Krishna Chandra.
I just remember I read Deepak Chopra's book, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind, a while ago. He said like every 7 years, all the cells in the body go completely change. Like every cell is recycled or whatever. So kind of that popped in my head when Prabhu was talking about, you not being the same person when you go in. I mean, I'm not even sure how accurate what he said is, but it just popped in my head.
Did you want to comment on that, Purnaprjna?
Well, that's a common understanding, even some devotees mention that to Prabhupada, how they say that every 7 years all your cells are replaced. And devotees use this to prove you're not the body because you're still the same person.
Mm-hmm.
So I know Deepak Chopra, he's basically an impersonalist. So he probably has some idea that you're not the body, but he doesn't have the personalist idea.
Right. I'll finish this page here. Okay. Let's see.
Let's go one step further.
Let's go one step further by assembling a dream team of the top 100 synthetic chemists, top 100 biochemists, and top 100 evolutionary biologists. And let's give them unlimited funding. They have all the carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and amino acids stored in their freezers and not in caves. Give them all the reagents, the most advanced laboratories, and ask them to assemble a single cell. They will simply scratch their heads and walk away. So let's help the dream team out by giving them all the enzymes and all the DNA and RNA and whatever sequence they want. Then ask them to assemble these into a living system. The dream team will not even know where to start. What goes on in a tiny cell is a source of amazement for those who study it. Dr. Robert W. Carter, who received a PhD in marine biology, gave a talk entitled The Extraordinary Design of DNA. Here is an abstract of what he said. Would you like to continue for the next page? Purnaprjna.
There is tremendous diversity among living beings. Most of their genes are shared and their biochemistry is similar, but there are developmental genes called Hox genes, which create an amazing diversity as the embryo forms. Hox proteins encode and specify the characteristics of position, ensuring that the correct structures form in the correct places of the body. They are master computer programs that have a massive downstream effect. They control the development of the embryo in amazing ways. These master programs are like an operating system in a computer which control the middle programs that control all the outputs, such as creating proteins and sugars. The cells are programmed much more optimally than computers. Thus, when we look at a cell in terms of genetics or molecular structure, there is incredible design. The standard Darwinian story runs into a lot of trouble when confronted with these Hox genes because, as any computer programmer knows, if you were to randomly monkey with the operating system, the whole thing would crash. Of course, during Darwin's time, nothing was known about the genetic makeup of the cell, and so anything could be imagined. That is to say, the more we understand about the complexities of life, the more difficult it becomes to accept Darwin's theory. There has been a revolution in technology in the last 10 or 15 years that has enabled our understanding of the cell's complexity to skyrocket, while the standard paradigm ability to explain this has plummeted. There are 4 dimensions of complexity in the genome. Also, I just want to say at this point that I listened to this person's long, talk, and it was very technical. And of course, I'm not trained in this area, so it's not like I understand, all these things. I just did my best to try in more simple terms, give an idea of what he's saying. But at least from that, we can just understand that everything is so complex. Everything is so amazingly acting way beyond our capacity to understand that it just gives them appreciation of what as Prabhupada would say, what a big brain there is behind all this. There are 4 dimensions of complexity in the genome. The subject is complex and technical, but let us say that there are multi-layers of programming in the DNA, and not just linear programming as we have in computer software. What goes on in genetic programming is beyond our imagination and beyond our ability to mimic. DNA information is stored in a line, 1 dimension, of base pairs of nucleotides. So, in the native understanding of the DNA, it is information stored in a line, but it's not that simple. What goes on in the DNA is 2-dimensional in the sense that one part of the DNA produces a protein, which then goes to another part of the genome and switches on or turns off a gene. Thus, the programming in DNA is self-modifying, unlike our computer programs, which are static. There's a huge 2-dimensional interaction network. It's a program that's modifying itself. Then the genome folds into a 3-dimensional shape. Genes that are buried are inactive, while the genes on the surface are active. This means that the genome knows where the genes would be situated after the folding process is complete. Thus, the information in the 1st dimension of DNA, in the line of base parts of nucleotides, contains multi-levels of instructions that defy description. I will stop there.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions before we go further? Otherwise,
I'll say that if you said you don't have any education in this, but you've done an amazingly good job of explaining things for that being the case. It's, I do understand, I have a science degree, so I understand these things to some degree. And it's what you've written is quite easy to follow. I think you've done a great job. I'm very eager to get the book.
Oh, thank you. I'm a little bit educated, maybe a small intelligence, but I just started researching, and then day after day after day, a little more, a little more, a little more. Actually, I didn't do anything else for maybe a year, only this, eating, sleeping, and doing this.
Yeah.
And then, put together what I could.
Nanda Putney, you're next.
Foundation $10,000 a month. That was in 1970 something to further their research. He was so wanting that to happen. So I'm just assuming that Prabhupada's very pleased with this. This is wonderful service. Thank you.
Nanda Putney, please.
Okay. When neo-Darwinian evolutionary scientists first saw how the genes were not working linearly, they concluded that much of the DNA served no purpose, and thus they termed it junk DNA. They concluded that this was a convincing argument for random evolution, which would naturally produce much that was useless along with something useful. However, someone figured out how to look at the genome in 3 dimensions, and the result was that all the so-called junk DNA served useful purposes previously not understood. It was found that genes that had been far apart, even in other chromosomes, when folded, became next to each other to perform a particular purpose. Thus, the programming in the one-dimensional genome took into account how the genes would be located in the three-dimensional space when folded. The fourth dimension in time
Is time.
What is the fourth dimension is time, sorry, because the genome changes shape over time. The buried genes are needed at some future time, and so the shape of the protein changes to expose them. This is done, for example, when someone eats something toxic. The liver understands this, and so the chromosomes in the liver will change shape so that a new protein gene is exposed to build a new protein that will kill the toxin, can kill the toxin. Then, when it's not needed, it refolds to the original shape. Amazingly, the DNA genome rewrites itself. This is dynamic programming. During a talk at Penn State University at the end of 2018, Perry Marshall, the author of Evolution 2.0, talked about this in detail, and some of his talk is paraphrased here. How does the genetic code work? DNA isn't just a spiral chain of molecules. It is an encoding and a decoding system and a storage system. It stores information like a hard drive, while binary code is ones and zeros. DNA has 4 letters, A for adenine, C for cytosine, G for guanine, and T for thymine. DNA performs digital communication. When a strand of DNA is read, it unwinds temporarily, and a messenger RNA copies from the DNA, and then the ribosome turns the letters into amino acids. So there's encoding and decoding. Information is a message sent between an encoder and a decoder according to the rules of the digital code. Here's an example of encoding. I press A on a keyboard and 1001 goes onto a wire, and then 1001 goes onto another wire, and then the screen shows an A, encoding and decoding. This shows that what goes on in the cell is not accidental and not random. Perry Marshall says that when you look at the hand at the end of your arm, you must feel that it was designed for a purpose. The astonishing design of the human body will be described in the second chapter. In this chapter, the mechanisms at work within the cell are briefly described, as well as the information stored in the spine of the DNA that allows these mechanisms to be constructed. Classical Darwinism and the neo-Darwinian synthesis both insist that the information and the machinery came about by a random, unguided process with no purpose in mind. These evolutionary scientists are forced to think like this because their worldview is materialistic, and so no other explanation is admissible. Those who view life as being more than a mere collection of molecules see the same empirical evidence, but are convinced that the digital information stored in the DNA that allows the construction of complex protein machines must have been consciously and intelligently arranged. Their worldview doesn't limit them to accept only blind physical laws as the cause of life's complexities, and so they're free to appreciate how the evidence points to intelligent control. As the understanding of the cell has unfolded, its mysteries have left scientists dumbfounded, so that only the most staunch old-school evolutionists continue to use the words random and chance. The complexities of the cell are so confounding that the technical articles found in scientific journals written by those who advocate abiogenesis are filled with suppositions, speculations, and imagined accounts of how things might have occurred. These accounts are commonly referred to as just so stories and hand-waving speculations. In the film entitled Cosmic Origins from Big Bang to Humankind, produced in conjunction with the Wright Center of Tufts University, the narrator says, the chemical elements essential for life, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, were now in place. What was needed was a way of combining them. Are you there, Gora? Okay. Perhaps the energy came from lightning. Whatever it was, energy managed to arrange these chemical ingredients in just the right way to make long molecules like proteins and DNA. By about 3.5 billion years ago, a dramatic change had occurred on Earth. There was now life on the planet. When asked, why do mainstream evolutionary biologists stick to the conviction that life evolved from chemicals, the late Philip E. Johnson, former professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley, while being interviewed, explained that the reason is ideological, not scientific.
Krishna Chandra Prabhu?
Yeah, just a comment, because this Professor Johnson, he's written a book. I think his book is Tornado in a Junkyard. Is that correct? Purnaprjna? Anyway,
I don't know.
one of the creationist scientists, and I read many of their books quite some time ago, and they do very good science and scientific explanations. And one thing that I remember is that even if you wanted to try to make one of the smallest protein molecules by chance, it would be the possibility, even given unlimited time, would be less than 1/10 raised to the 50th, no, 3 millionth power or something like that, a huge. And then statisticians, they consider by probability that anything, the chance less than 1/10 raised to the 50th power, not to be very slightly probable, but impossible.
Yeah, that's also in my book a little later.
Okay, good. All right. Increasing my desire to read it.
Great minds think alike. Yeah, so Krishna Chandra Prabhu, will you be ready to read after Krishna Chandra Rasangi? After Krishna Chandra finishes, will you be ready to read Rasangi, or are you driving? Okay, anyway, Krishna Chandra, please continue.
Of course.
Without abiogenesis.
Thank you. Without abiogenesis, scientists wouldn't have an explanation of how life came to be, and that's intolerable. Scientists don't like to have no answer. They prefer to have an inadequate paradigm rather than say we don't know. If they said this, then they would have nowhere to start their experiments, and they would not get research grants, tenure, media coverage, and so on. For them, it is better to have an unprovable theory than no theory at all. The proposal that an intelligent agent created life is unacceptable to Darwinian evolutionists, not because of the evidence, but because it suggests, as currently practiced, nothing outside the purview of science is acceptable. The kind of science that is done today cannot tell us about the origin of life. Some even become angry if this is suggested because they think that there can be nothing outside the purview of science. In the Middle Ages, alchemists thought that they could transform lead into gold. They thought this because they didn't have an understanding of atomic structure. When this was later understood, alchemy disappeared. Evolution is a kind of modern alchemy wherein scientists hope that non-living molecules can be turned into living beings. Now, when so much more is known about information content in the cell, the idea of abiogenesis should be discarded, and it should be recognized that scientists will never be able to understand how the informational content required to construct new life forms took place. Just as alchemists needed to learn more about alchemistry to understand why they couldn't turn lead into gold, evolutionists need to understand more about life, to understand that something more than naturalistic causes is required to understand it. But due to pride, most evolutionary scientists may not give up their futile attempt and admit that it is beyond their capacity to learn, to know about life's origin by their materialistic approach. Similarly, it is out of inordinate pride that physicists like Stephen Hawking try to propose a theory of everything, which in fact explains very little, if anything. It is hard to change the minds of those who are used to ruling all knowledge. As our knowledge of the complexity encountered in embryology and molecular biology increases, it will become more and more difficult to deny that what is involved is much more complex than what can be accounted for by the Darwinian theory. It will become increasingly rickety as a paradigm. Research should then shift away from the unsolvable question of life's origin. Scientists should act as scientists and admit when they do not know something. But in today's world, they are taken as metaphysicians and have to give an explanation for everything, even if they don't have one. They are expected to give an explanation in the role they play, and so they are forced to do so. Critics of Darwinian evolution, such as Lynn Margulis and Stephen Jay Gould, are accepted within the mainstream because they stay within the naturalistic paradigm and offer a vague alternative in keeping with a naturalistic worldview. The suggestion that there is something wrong with the worldview isn't allowed. The scientific culture, the rulers of science, are determined to exclude anyone who questions their paradigm. They are determined to keep those questions like, where did we come from, within their domain.
Thank you very much, Krishna Chandra. I don't know if you noticed Purnaprjna, but Krishna Chandra has a wonderful reading voice.
Thank you, Prabhu. I'm pleased to
Haribol, Laura.
Hare Krishna Bhavatrini.
Okay. Haribol. Oh, never mind.
Yeah, I had a question for you, Purnaprjna Prabhu, and that is that I remember Saraswati Prabhu mentioning that Sir Isaac Newton and Louis Pasteur, he described them as being metaphysicians, and at least the way I was understanding his point is that at a certain point, science included the concept of metaphysics, that which laid beyond the purview of the imperfect senses. But I don't know if it was the Renaissance or at what period, but there was a change in the worldview where metaphysics was like, because you were saying nothing exists. What was the statement? Nothing. outside science is acceptable, you stated. But it seems at some point in history, the concept of science included metaphysics, which seemed to include that which was beyond. Would you like to say something about that, please?
Well, yes, the early founders of science mostly were godly persons, and they viewed the universe as the work of God, and they believed that God gave them the ability, the intelligence to study it. So they didn't think of the universe as being the ultimate truth or the absolute truth, but they just accepted the existence of God beyond. Whereas, kind of beginning with Darwin or at that era, people became more atheistic, and so it's in this book also. There's someone named Popper,
Hmm.
an influential.
Sir Francis Popper?
I don't know, but he's a philosophy of science.
Right.
So he gave the idea that science only deals with that which is falsifiable. In other words, that which is you can observe whether it is true or false. And anything beyond, forget it, because it's beyond. What can we know about it? Just forget it. So that's kind of the turning point where science became. And there's other people later on, they'll describe how even, 40, 50 years ago, if you were an agnostic or even a religious person, scientists would kind of accept it, but now it's utterly scorned, So, how atheists are, they're often, as dedicated as devotees are, dedicated to Prabhupada and, the Bhagavad Gita, the atheists are dedicated. There's no God. That's absurd, And when you talk about it, you're just a kook.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of attitude has gained prominence.
Daneshwar Prabhu has had his hat up. Prabhu?
Yeah. I just want to say, the going back to Lewantin and biology as ideology, not only biology but all of the sciences, but they are the priests of the modern world who purport to provide the answers to the existential questions of life, and that's their purpose. That's why they're propped up, and that's why they don't actually do science, but they do metaphysics. They go outside the legitimate bounds of their domain frequently, as Judakarma Prabhu has demonstrated in his books, and there's many scientific writers who write about that. There is a scientific method, but they ignore that when it's convenient, and then just simply trip into the field of metaphysical explanation, where they, Big Bang. There's no experiment you can make to prove or disprove the Big Bang. It's not science, it's hypothesis, but they present it as science. And because most people are, mystified by science, they get away with it. So again, they're propped up by the powers that be, because they lead people to a materialistic conception of life and eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we're all going to die.
Yeah, that's also discussed later on in the book, that just because someone's a scientist doesn't mean that everything he speaks is scientific.
Mm.
So previously, they might have had some humility to understand, well, I'm a scientist, I'm not everything. But now, like, he said that now scientists are the high priests, so they can be asked anything, what is your idea of God? What is God? And they give an answer.
Mm-hmm. That's why Prabhupada said preaching to the scientists is our most important preaching, because he said they're the most influential people in society. Rasangi,
Yeah.
are you able to read, Rasangi, or are you driving? But Orion, are you able to read or are you driving?
I'm able to read. I'm home.
Okay, great.
I'm sitting in my bedroom.
Would you like to continue, please?
I will. I hope I can read this complicated stuff. So fascinating. I love it.
There we go. Even a scientist.
Even a scientist within the establishment who questions their worldview will be subject to disciplinary action and peer disapproval. The dogma of science that naturalistic processes brought life into being cannot be challenged, just as the dogma of the Vatican could not be challenged during the Renaissance. It is a dogma of the scientific naturalistic faith that cannot be challenged. And their propaganda network extends to the media. They have a strong hold on the dissemination of knowledge. Scientists feel that they have become free from the dogma of the church by establishing their own exclusive dogma, and it must not be challenged. Wow. Science as a substitute for religion. Science as a substitute for religion was perhaps first proposed by the French philosopher Auguste Comte. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Comte.
Comte in the 19th century. He argued that scientific beliefs were destined to supersede. I can't see. Oh, wait a minute. My
And
screen.
primitive.
Wait, I have to move that. Okay, I moved it. Okay, that
He,
that life can be invoked. Wait. Oh,
he argued.
and yet even by the standards, is that where I am?
No. He argued that scientific beliefs.
Oh, he argued that scientific beliefs were destined to supersede and replace primitive religious views. With scientific positivism gave birth to today's scientism. The notion that science has exclusive access to the truth. And yet, even by the standards of scientism, a scientific theory must be demonstrated for it to be accepted. And it has never been demonstrated that life can be invoked by combining chemicals in the laboratory. The scientific revolution began in Europe as an attempt to gain positive knowledge of the world. It was a revolt against religious tyranny, which forced an acceptance of irrational religious dogma. And in the beginning, the authoritarian dogmatism of established religion stifled the spirit of scientific inquiry. However, when scientific knowledge prevailed, the adherents of religions were naturally criticized for adhering to faith in irrational doctrines as their basis of knowledge, rather than direct observation and reason. But now the tables have turned, and it is the neo-Darwinists who are relying on faith in scientism while disregarding observation and logic as their basis of understanding. Wow. I mean, that's such dogma. If nothing is being proven and they're still believing it, that's dogma. That's irrational belief in dogma. They can't even prove it, and yet they're attesting its correctness and scorning others who don't believe it. Okay. Nobel laureate Sir John Eccles wrote in Facing Reality, 1970, arrogance is one of the worst diseases of scientists, and it gives rise to statements of authority and finality which are expressed usually in fields that are completely beyond the scientific competence of the dogmatists. It is important to realize that dogmatism has now become a disease of the scientists rather than of the theologians That's so beautiful. That's so beautifully illustrated and conclusively, pointed out. Makes so much sense. Do I go on or is that done? Am I done? More?
Finish the page, please.
The
Finish the
result
page,
of
please.
our, okay. The result of our understanding the cell's complexity is that now no one even imagines synthesizing one from scratch in the laboratory, since the theory of chemical evolution has been researched for the last 150 years, and since no one has any idea of how non-living chemicals could have randomly combined to form the first cell, shouldn't the theory be laid to rest? The mainstream evolutionists would reply, unless you have a superior theory, there is no reason to discard abiogenesis. Within the vast universe, there's a tiny planet we call Earth. On that Earth, there are billions of people, appearing no larger than ants when viewed from space. Isn't it reasonable to assume that humans are so limited that they are unable on their own to understand the answers to the most fundamental questions, such as what is the origin of life on Earth? And suppose in the future, synthetic biologists are able to construct a cell from scratch. So what? A human body consists of trillions of cells, and there are 7 billion people inhabiting the earth. There are innumerable varieties of plants, animals, insects, and aquatics, and their bodies are composed of cells. Then there are bacteria. How many cells in total? They are uncountable, and the creation of cells has been going on for billions of years. Considering this, what credit is rightfully due the people that are hoping to one day synthesize a single cell? It's like College of the Absurd. It's absurd. It's like a play of absurdity, right? Like theater of the absurd. Is that it? One more sentence. Evolutionary scientists have utterly failed to prove their Darwinian theory of life's origin, and this is admitted by many highly respected scientists. David James Shapiro, professor of biochemistry at the University of Chicago. You have to scroll up a bit, Cora.
Oh,
I'll
okay, we'll
finish.
just finish.
I'll finish. That was great. That was so delightful, delightful.
But Orion, are you able to read? Baba Tarini, are you able to read?
I am able to read. She's not here. This is Harry.
Okay, I hope that no, I don't think you should read, Prabhu, because your voice is all broken up. It sounds terrible. I'm sorry.
Right now, it sounds.
No, it sounds like you're in outer space, like a million miles away. Okay, Shikarani, could you please continue, Shikarani? Dr. James Shapiro.
Okay. Dr. James Shapiro. Why don't I see that? Is it mid of the paragraph? Biochemistry at the University of Chicago. Okay. Yeah, professor of biochemistry at the University of Chicago says there are no detailed Darwinian accounts for the evolution of any fundamental biochemical of or cellular system, only a variety of wishful speculations. Due to the complex nature of even a single cell, many evolutionary scientists admit that life couldn't have arisen by chance. Nobel laureate Francis Crick, co-discoverer of the DNA structure, wrote, "An honest man armed with all the knowledge available to us now could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to have been satisfied to get it going. The magnitude of the problem of how life could have spontaneously formed on the early Earth has been recently expressed by Dr. Michael Denton, Senior Research Fellow of the Biochemistry Department of the University of Otago, New Zealand. When asked, what are the major problems with current origin of life scenarios? He said, one of the major problems is that no one can imagine, no one has worked out a way of getting an aqueous pool of water containing all the amino acids, all the sugars, and all the other building blocks you need to make a cell. This is a fundamental problem. How the prebiotic soup could have been generated. The second problem is, how do you go from a soup of organic compounds to a cell? Such a route has not been imagined. Is an awesome problem in science. Getting from the soup to the cell is a colossal problem, and how the soup could have been synthesized in the first place is also a colossal problem. The whole area of the origin of life is a profound mystery. Faced with the daunting challenge of providing that life somehow evolved by an unguided process from chemicals and being committed to atheism and reductionism, some leading scientists have been forced to purpose ideas that strain the limits of credibility. Professor Francis Crick, along with the British chemist Leslie Orgel, proposed the theory of directed panspermia in 1973. The co-discoverer of the double helical structure of the DNA molecule, Crick found it impossible that the complexity of DNA could have evolved naturally. Crick suggested that small grains containing DNA could have been sent here by an advanced civilization facing catastrophic annihilation or hoping to seed life for later colonization. This is certainly the product of a fertilized imagination, and it doesn't explain the origin of life, but transfers the problem elsewhere. Ben Stein, a former speechwriter for presidents, interviewed Richard Dawkins, the celebrated atheist, and part of their conversation reveals how far proponents of the theory of abiogenesis will go to defend it. Ben Stein, who did create the heavens and earth? Richard Dawkins, why do you use the word who? Ben Stein, well then how did it get started? Richard Dawkins, by a very slow process. Ben Stein, well, how did it start? Richard Dawkins, nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of events that must have happened for the origin of life. Ben Stein, what is that? Richard Dawkins, it was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule. Ben Stein, right, how did that happen? Richard Dawkins, I told you we don't know. Ben Stein, so you have no idea how it started. Richard Dawkins, no, nor has anyone else. Ben Stein, what do you think of the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics? Richard Dawkins, it could, yeah, if somebody else.
Purnaprjna, would you like to continue?
Can
Ben
I ask
Stein's,
a
Ben-
question?
Oh, Daneshvar started first and then Rusangi. Daneshvar.
Ben Stein has many videos, and he's very, very interesting person to watch in all of this. I don't know his background particularly, but he's very sharp and very good to watch. So you might pick up, look for some of his videos.
Okay, thank you. Rusangi?
Can I ask about that advanced civilization facing destruction, and then they somehow brought the cell to the earth are they talking about like aliens? What was meant there?
Purnaprjna, Prabhu?
Yeah, that's the idea that it's so foolish also, but the idea is that, okay, they admit life as we know it on Earth could not have been randomly, organized. You can't understand it. So it must have come from some other alien civilization. They put it here. The first cells, they put it here so that it could develop.
But that's our philosophy. we also subscribe to that. Life did come from somewhere else, and what they call aliens, we call demigods.
That's so interesting.
But the point is that these are atheistic scientists, so they're just putting the problem elsewhere. Then the question is, well, how did that alien civilization, how did their life come from?
Yeah, right. Where did it start? How far-fetched
No.
is that? You know, even so, they're scientists and they're talking about alien civilizations. I mean, I know that there's some proof of that. Maybe the scientists have proved that there are alien civilizations out there, but that's been also debunked a lot by scientists, I think. Anyway, it's just far-fetched. So they brought a cell here that began to grow and develop. That's the hypothesis. Thank you.
No, that is our philosophy, that life came from elsewhere. And if, I mean, in one sense, if you go back and you look at, our proposal that Vishnu's lying down, there's the lotus flower that grew out of his navel, and Brahma is self-born from that. That sounds kind of like some kind of evolutionary thing, right? How's Brahma self-born? That's almost like some kind of idea like that. So ultimately it's going to come down to belief. What do you want to believe?
But except
Does
that
it not?
that's coming from God anyway, though, Dennis Ward.
Well, sure. We
coming
accept
from
it.
God.
We accept that the source is Krishna is the cause of all causes, but our creation story is no less fantastic than their proposal.
Whew. Right.
Dinesh Prabhu, would you like to finish this conversation with Richard Dawkins and Ben Stein, please?
Okay. Richard Donkey. It could come from about in the following way. It could be that some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved to a higher level by Darwinian means and designed a life that they seeded onto this planet. Now that is an intriguing possibility. And I suppose you might find evidence of that if you look at the details of molecular biology, so that you might find a signature of a designer. That designer could well be an intelligence from elsewhere. That intelligence must have come about by some explicable process. Ben Stein comments after the interview, so Richard Dawkins is not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God. Is the idea of transpermia science or science fiction? Being utterly at a loss to explain how the first cell might have been created by natural undirected causes, some scientists offer bizarre, unscientific speculations. Prominent Darwinist Michael Ruse, while being interviewed, was asked how we got from an inorganic world to a cell. He replied, "A popular theory is that we might have started off on the backs of crystals. Molecules piggybacked on crystals forming, and this led to more complex molecules. The nice thing about crystals is that every now and then you get mistakes, mutations, and this opens a way for natural selections." By the way, for those who may not understand, crystals do grow. Mm-hmm. And so they grow in caves and so on like that. So that's what he's saying, that as they develop the lattice structure of the crystals, they make mistakes and they don't form perfectly. So that's what he's referring to there. When he was asked if that theory was more likely than intelligent design, he said, "Yes, I think it is." Sir Isaac Newton said, "A man may imagine things that are false, but he can only understand things that are true." Mm. There are others who had faith in neo-Darwinism, but when they were confronted with the ever-increasing evidence of information and design in the cell, They became convinced that this indicated his designer was superior intelligence. In 2009, there were Darwin's bicentennial birth celebrations throughout the world. At the Museum of Natural History in Stuttgart, a grand celebration was directed by the German paleontologist Gunther Betschli. He wanted to make it clear that to the public that there was no debate about Darwin's ideas among scientists. To refute the idea of intelligent design, he made a model of the bacteria's flagellum because of its iconic status. He wanted to show how it could have evolved naturally. So that's in a E. coli, I think. The flagellum is a little rotor that is his motor that he moves around with. Dr. Beckley also made a display of a balance with all the books refuting Darwinism on one side and Origin of Species on the other. He showed how the single book went down because it was heavier with evidence. Then he made the mistake of reading the books on the lighter side and was surprised to find that the arguments he encountered were far different from what he had heard from his colleagues and the YouTube videos of Darwinian evolutionists giving presentations. He saw that those who questioned neo-Darwinism were being mistreated and that their arguments were being misrepresented. When Dr. Beckley encountered Dr. Bayes' idea of irreducible complexity, he deeply thought over the speculations of how the flagellum could have randomly assembled, assisted by natural selection, and became convinced that these were unverifiable and unscientific. By the way, in Dr. Bayes' book, he's a mathematician, and in his book, he gives an example of this to show that the number of parts of this simple machine, a very single cell organism, the various parts required to make that flagellum go, approved intelligent design. In other words, they could not have, because several parts were required to make the entire thing function, it could not have come about as a matter of Darwin's suggestion of chance mutation. Okay, back to this. Then he contacted scientists who supported the theory that such mechanisms must have been intelligently produced. When he contacted them, he found that they were not the religious fanatics as often portrayed by mainstream scientists and the press, but were serious and open-minded scientists who wanted to understand whether neo-Darwinian theories were verified or whether they were genuine scientific reasons to doubt them. Beckley did not fit the stereotype of a Darwin skeptic. He had never been religious, he had never gone to church, and had simply been interested in nature and natural science. There are many scientists who hold religious beliefs, and when they study the astonishing design and complexity of the cell, their faith is not challenged, but it becomes strengthened. And I will say, that when I'm in the doctor's office, and in the doctors, you probably see they have, diagrams or, displays on the wall of the different parts of the body, whatever they're doing, whether it's eyes or ears or whatever. And it's so complex, only a fool could think that that comes about by chance.
Right.
Okay.
World is full of fools.
Yeah.
I have one question. We can take some questions now for Purnaprjna Prabhu before we wind it up. What is the definition of transpermia science?
Well, transpermia is the idea that life was planted on the earth from another planet or another civilization.
Okay. In other words, Richard Dawkins is so envious of Krishna that rather than acknowledging a god, it must be some aliens from someplace else. Anything but God.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's horribly mocking. You know, he'll take teenage school children to fossil sites, you know, and they collect fossils, and he'll say, you know, these were collected billions and billions of years ago, so your story of Genesis is rubbish. I mean, he's very bitter. You know, he's not pleasant on the issue.
I would love to see a devotee challenge Dawkins in an argument. Of course, he'll never back down, but
Laura, do you know Maheshwar in Ireland, the Irish devotee who wrote a lot about flat Earth from the Bhagavatam?
I've been in touch with him. I'm trying to get him on video, and he says he never comes on.
Well, he wrote a book. What did he call it? Dawkins wrote that book. What? God's
Delusion.
Folly? Huh? God's Delusion. So he wrote a book, Dawkins Delusion, and it was a wonderful book. And I don't think he published it. I was encouraging him to try to get it into print, but it was really good.
I'll write to him right after we're done. I'll write to him.
Yeah, he's kind of a Luddite, unfortunately. So it's going to be hard to get him.
I've been pressuring him to come on. I'll see if I can, or maybe I have to try other tactics. I'll try everything in the book.
Yeah, you have to get him to somebody else's house that has a computer.
Okay, good idea. Any other questions? We're very fortunate to have Purnaprjna Prabhu here, the author of this amazing book. I'm hoping he'll join us again on Monday if he's not busy at 7:30 p.m. so we can continue. We do this every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Purnaprjna Prabhu. Do you think you may be able to come back so we can continue?
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's that's great to hear.
I just have a comment.
Yes.
If I can. So, Hare Krishna Prabhu. It reminded me of the recent incident where a NASA scientist intern from India, she was going for an internship program and she had posted on social media, she was kind of praying to Lord Saraswati because basically she had a lot of pictures of God on her office table. And so I know, like you guys know that mostly for education, like different demigods are worshipped for different things. So Goddess Saraswati is considered to be more about education and music. So usually every student in India, they always have a Goddess Saraswati picture around their study table or something. And she was mocked so much by the whole leftist community and the liberals in India that she is a NASA scientist. How can she put a picture of God on her table? It was a big issue, like everywhere. Even I think in Washington Post or somewhere, like the news were all over the internet, and it was so sad, like to see all that happening. Some scientists being humiliated. Yeah.
Purnaprjna, what were you saying, Purnaprjna?
I'm just saying everywhere it's becoming so degraded.
Yeah. Like she was just being humiliated because she is a scientist and she believes in God. That was shocking. Like, even if somebody is kind of big believer of God nowadays, if they are taking science, they don't say anything vocally. Otherwise, they will be humiliated and mocked by their...
It's not just science, it's everybody in academia. Practically, they're all atheists. It's been completely subverted.
Yes, I was shocked. Back in the 80s, our temple was beside the University of Ottawa, so I went to speak to the Dean of Religious Studies to see if I could address his world religions class. And he said, oh yes, religion. He said, it is a necessary crutch for people to help them cope through the difficulties of life. And I was shocked. I thought, what? You're the dean of the Department of Religion, and you're referring to religion as a crutch that mankind had to make up in order to deal with the problems. I was shocked.
People want to sound intelligent, but I think they sound more stupid telling these things.
What was the name of that professor that was being ridiculed?
Yeah, I'll tell you. Her name is one second. What was her exact name? I just saw it. Like, I just wanted to see her name. So I saw the internet. And
Have you been able to get this book out to any scholars or philosophers, Purnaprjna Prabhu?
Well, the book has recently come out, and I did actually send like a prototype of this book to one of the scientists who's mentioned in this book, who's against Darwin theory, this
yeah,
Michael Behe.
Uh-huh.
And he appreciated it, but later on in the book, I proposed that life is distinct from the body and explain a couple verses from Bhagavad Gita. So he said, I liked your book, but I didn't, because I'm a Roman Catholic, I have theological differences. He says, maybe your book is very good for Indians only, you know, like that.
yeah. So I saw the name of that girl. Her name is Pratima Roy, and she's a Bengali, but she's an Indian American, basically American citizen. And NASA posted her photo because NASA was posting that these people have been selected for internship as a scientist or whatever. And then people started trolling the NASA on Twitter.
Well, Sangi, did you have a comment or question to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to say the nice thing about Prabhu being here with us, that you can post this on our Prabhupada page, and hundreds of God brothers and God sisters will get to hear this as well.
I already did that with part 1. That's my intention to do it with part
No,
2.
but now Prabhu is here and you can play that up. The
Yes.
author of the book.
Yes, for
You
sure.
should show the book.
Yay, show the book.
I did. I already have that. I'm ahead of both of you.
Hey.
What's the subtitle, Prabhu?
Subtitle.
It's a critique of abiogenesis.
All right. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Mm.
hmm
Yeah, I just had a comment also. It's about the way that scientists can have such enormous hubris. And I was mentioning the CRISPR technology, where they can edit the genes and everything. And they actually got so far as to create CRISPR babies. They're called CRISPR babies in the lab. And this Chinese man, he actually created 3 babies with all these edited genes, which contravened the whole of the rest of the world scientific community. And he actually ended up going to jail for 3 years, to prison for 3 years. But I bring it up only in the context of, you know, what we were talking about early in the readings of, you know, scientists just manipulating in the lab, almost like Frankenstein, you know, and having this incredible power and hubris around it within their own community, thinking that this is actually a great gift to the world. And yet, you know, if they can mess about in the labs and create humans this way, it is a rather frightening prospect.
Perhaps everybody's heard about Human 2.0 by now.
No.
The World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab from there, he's got another book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, and they're very much into transhumanism. They want to combine man and machine, and what the Tesla guy, what's his name?
Elon Musk.
Musk, yeah, he's you know, trying to work it out so that you can get plugged into the internet. So, you know, there's no limits for these people. They have, because they have no conception of spirit, they just think of the body as a machine, and they want to improve on God's creation right, with all of their manipulation. Their plan is not to have any normal human beings by
Biological
2025.
human beings. Yeah. Mhm. Have you read Homo Deus by Yuval Harari?
No.
Oh, you have to look that up, Dineshwar. It's he wrote Homo sapiens, which of course is kind of on the Darwinian spectrum, but Homo Deus is precisely about the AI fusion with the human. And he's actually very, very good on that subject because he puts up enormous warnings, even though he's actually kind of an atheist himself. But nonetheless, yeah, Homo Deus.
Can you put that in the text box?
Okay.
Chat box?
It is kind of chilling. But that's what
I would like to look at it. Put it in the chat box so I can find it.
We have
Sure.
we have Dr. Nitya Leela Maheshwari here, Purnaprjna Prabhu. She hails from Pakistan, Karachi, and can you show yourself, Nitya Leela? She was saying that she's asking if this book is downloadable. It is available on Amazon, although Badarayan Prabhu told me when I gave him the link, he tried to order the book from Amazon, and he had some difficulty. I don't know what that difficulty was. But is this book available, aside from it being available in softcover form?
And Amazon is also on Kindle or whatever.
Kindle, okay. Uh-huh. But
Please accept my humble obeisances and sorry.
Go ahead, Nitya.
Please accept my humble obeisances. Yeah, sorry, actually, the signals will be dropping off because I'm traveling city to city because of some professional working. But yes, I heard bit of the conversation going on this subject of book. It's really wonderful and would like to read it. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll have to get a copy to you, Nitya Leela, and this should be this should be translated into Urdu
Yeah.
Ryan, can you say something?
Yes. Yeah, I've been driving, so it's been difficult for me to jump in, but I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and it's so important. Prabhupada emphasized this type of preaching as Prabhupada said, I've come to the West. I've come for two missions. One, to establish Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and second, to destroy the conception of the materialistic atheistic scientists. So these are the two top missions of Srila Prabhupada. He expressed that, as was mentioned previously. He told Rameshwar he wanted $10,000 to $20,000 a month from the BBT to go into the scientific preaching, because we know at the epicenter of the grip of the atheistic materialists, the fulcrum point of their grip in the material world is this conception, this Darwinian conception, Darwinian Big Bang conception that life comes from matter. And so Prabhupada was adamant and enthusiastic and wanted us to be really like warriors in this regard, intelligent warriors to preach this message. So this book is a great service. And now somehow to really expand that preaching. I don't really think that the BI is focused on that whatsoever. It's unfortunate, but we shouldn't.
Druta. He continues.
Druta Karma is, from my understanding, preaching in this regard. But I appreciate the service very much, and I so much appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for listening in. We'll be doing this Monday. Any final comments or questions from anyone before we call it an evening?
Yeah, I do have question.
Nitya Leela, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. What is the most difficult part? Is it conversion of pupil from some religion sect to Krishna conscious culture, or it is conversion of atheist to Krishna conscious culture? What are the experiences?
Do you understand the question, Purnaprjna?
Not completely. She's asking which is more difficult, to convert an atheist to Krishna consciousness, or what?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what is more difficult? From religion to another religion, conversion is more challenging, or from atheist to Krishna consciousness conversion?
Well, I am not sure. Just like when Prabhupada was here, people joined who were atheists, people who joined, I don't know if people joined that were very deeply dedicated to other religions. I think perhaps it is more difficult for a person who is deeply dedicated to another religion, because there's a story that I think Prabhupada even told this, and at Chutananda he would tell this story that someone practiced the piano on his own. He learned so much, but he wanted to get better. He had just self-taught for a long time. So he went to a piano teacher and he said, okay, it'll cost you $600. And then while he was there, someone came in who had never tried to play the piano, just starting from scratch. And he said, okay, for you, $300. And the first person said, but I've learned so much. Why is my fee so much more? He said, $300 to unteach what you have already learned, and then $300 to teach you.
Wow.
So those who are deeply committed to some religion, maybe it's $300 to make them forget what they have learned.
I'm leaving.
Very nice. Yeah.
Perhaps, Nityalila, there may be some professors in Pakistan. They may find Purnaprjna Prabhu's book interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be. Yeah.
Well, whatever we can do to help promote your book, Purnaprjna Prabhu, then that's
Yes.
service to Srila Prabhupada.
Well, I would just ask you to request people read the book, and if you like it, then give it to your friends and associates. Try to spread it around.
Have you presented this to
It's
the...
only $8.
Mm. Can you
It's
tell us the
small.
publisher one more time?
It's Mayapriya Long.
No, but the publisher.
Oh, it's
Publisher.
publisher. You go to bookrights.press.com.
Oh,
It's
okay.
book, B-O-O-K, and then W-R-I-G-H-T-S. W-R-I-G-H-T-S press.com, and then you will get everything.
Okay, thanks, Prabhu.
How did you get them as a publisher, Prabhu?
Pardon?
How did you get them as a publisher? How did you get them to take your book?
Well, what happened was that I had mostly all of my books are published by BBT in Bombay.
Right.
And then here I am in America. Well, there's one book that I compiled that they didn't want to publish, but I thought was a very good book. Then what happened was I had written the book Gargamuni. I had edited. So Gargamuni had sent me all of his transcripts, or someone sent me all the transcripts, and I made the book out of it. And then one day on Facebook, I saw that Mayapriya Long, she was selling the Gargamuni book. So I thought, oh, I'll contact her. And then she was agreeable. So I sent her that book and then also this book, and she published them.
Oh, she published it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was wondering if Brahmatirtha Prabhu, the head of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for all of North America, whether he has seen this book and given his seal of approval yet.
But he's not head of BI in America. There's BI in Berkeley,
I see.
which is a branch of the original BI in Bombay.
Uh-huh.
That's Rasharaj. So, well, I sent the book to Hridayananda, who
Yes.
actually arranged the house for the BI in Gainesville. And he thanked me for sending, but he hasn't gotten around to reading it yet. And because, well, I don't want to say why, but anyway, I'm just leaving it as far as that BI group. I'm just leaving it first to Hridayananda.
Okay.
He's kind of the intellectual head of it.
I see. Great. Well, I look forward to progressing through it. Tonight we made how many pages were we able to read? Not so many, but because your book is dense. It's a lot to absorb. We're on page 19. So we went 12, 13, 14, 15. 8 pages tonight. And we'll continue more with what microbiologist Michael J. Behe has to say on a staunch neo-Darwinist, what he has to say on Monday. So how many chapters in this book, and which chapter are we on right now?
Well, the first chapter
Do you
is
know,
the
Purnaprjna
biggest.
Prabhu?
The first chapter is the biggest,
Okay.
and there's 4 chapters. But the last chapter is very, very small. And the second and third chapters are also, the first chapter, I think, is much more than half the book.
Are we still on we must still be on the first chapter then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hare Krishna, I think there is a Zoom user want to ask some question. Zoom
Oh,
user.
yes. Thank you. That's Bhavatrini and Rahari. I hope your voice comes out better than before. It was all broken up.
Okay.
Bhavatrini,
Okay,
let's hear you.
hear us? Can you hear us now? Can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Much better. We can't see anything. We just see the ceiling in your car. Okay, there she is.
Oh, sorry.
Hare Krishna. And there's Hari.
Okay. So, Hare Krishna. Sorry, I'm driving. But first of all, I just wanted to thank so much Purnaprjna Prabhu for this presentation. This book is phenomenal. It's great. I had a background on science, but I dropped everything. I do have some pretty famous, probably the best neurosurgeon in the world in the 70s. He's professor at Yale, retired, and he's a total atheist. And so the question Nichalila asked, one of the things she asked, what is most difficult to convince an atheist or somebody of another religion? And I understood that any fanatic is impossible to convince. And through your book and what you were saying, there's a preconception there, and that anything to do with spiritual life is some form of dogma of fanaticism. But my question was this, which it really attracted me through the readings of our spiritual master, Prabhupada. There is a measurement for the size of the particle. At one time, Prabhupada called it antimatter of the soul, of the 10,000th part of the tip of a hair. Is there any instrumentation nowadays that would measure such a thing?
No.
Purnaprjna Prabhu. Can't hear you.
Yes, well, Rupanuga told me that Saraswati figured that it was, I forget, 2 or 4 angstroms. Angstrom is the smallest measurement in science, I guess.
Yes.
But the problem is that it's not just small, but it's subtle.
Hmm.
So it's not just a question of small, but it's too subtle. Just like nobody can see your mind because it is subtle. And the
I
soul,
understand that point.
So there's no instrument.
So there is no instrumentation. I know that, and I understand the point of subtlety. Oh, and like last century,
We're just looking at your
Einstein,
hand right now, Prabhu, or your head, okay. Now we see you. Okay, yes.
all right. So last century, Einstein started, they talk about molecules, which, were like foreign things to people and scientists. But he spoke about the definition of light, how it's made of particles. And we have of course, we know we are energy, marginal energy, but superior energy, nevertheless. And it's very subtle, of course. That point I understand. But it nevertheless is a phenomenon that exists. So that would be the genius of any scientist, be able, a devotee that could then demonstrate this. Perhaps I forget now how he demonstrated that actually light constituted of particles and not just waves, and how it moves. Do you remember if it was a mathematical equation they came out with, or?
Who was that? Einstein?
Yes.
Yeah, Einstein. Einstein proved that light was, up until his time, turn of the century, last century, beginning of the last century, everybody thought, actually, scientists thought that light was just a massive thing transmitted in waves.
Well, you're talking about
Einstein
light,
proved them wrong.
light, not life.
No, no, light.
Oh no, well,
sunshine light.
the sunshine, the actual scientific question was whether sunshine light is a particle or a wave, not life.
Right.
Right.
No, I never said life.
Oh,
What I
I'm
was
sorry.
talking about was whether it's a wave or a particle, or
Okay.
a particle. And that's what I was saying, that, so, okay, he had, what equation he came out was a mathematical equation. And it's so, because it's moving now into the very subtle form of energy. We are, and we were existent. We are life. I mean, so that it's a phenomenon rather than just some imaginary thing. Although, the new scientists are like, already prejudiced against anything that had to do with scripture or shastra.
Yeah.
And so my question was that, since he proved that the existence of that light is actually transmitted, are particles, constituted of particles, then how can we, shouldn't be, and I love your book. It's just like, it's stamped by itself. It's like anybody that will continue to claim evolution is, in a way, they are fanatic. They're dogmatic. And you prove that in your book. So thank you so much for that. My question to the scientific community of devotees is that it's got to be some way to prove the particle of energy called Atma exists. Because actually we're moving with
the scientific experiment, whether light is a particle or a wave, was inconclusive because the experiment showed that it is both a particle and a wave.
Schrodinger's cat, right? Dineshwar?
Schrodinger's another concept.
Was it?
That's oh no, I'm thinking that's right, Schrodinger. Yeah, I'm thinking Heisenberg, but yeah, it's both a particle and a wave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Purnaprjna, something to respond, Purnaprjna, Prabhu.
Well, I don't have response to that. I just wanted to say I'm going to leave now.
Okay, please accept our respectful obeisances. Please come back at 7:30 p.m. We'll continue Monday, Krishna willing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
for all of you for appreciating my little efforts to do something.
Oh, fantastic. We're here to support you.
Thank you. More power to you.
And
Yeah. Manjako,
yes, more power to you.
Yes,
Thank
Kripa.
you, bro. Thank you so much.
Prabhupada ki jai.
Uh,
Hari Hari Bol.
Yeah, scientific devotees.
Scientific devotees ki jai. Defeating the atheist. With Dawkins ki jai. Face with
Dawkins, keep going.
Darwin ki jai.
Kick on Darwin's face with boot. Key Jai.
Jai.
yeah.
The more we kick on Darwin's face with the boot, the more spiritual advancement we make. Let's keep advancing. Kicking our
In a few lifetimes.
kicking our way back home. All right.